Hello and welcome back to the end of the season finale of Dutiful Future. It is week 10. This is episode 10, and with me I have a good friend of mine, Billy Lucas.
Hello, thank you for having me on.
Billy, who are you and why are you here today, Billy?
I'm Billy Lucas. I am a second-year PACE student. I'm from Huddersfield. I do the magazine, the Perspectives magazine, with the Politics Society.
Check that out. Several good articles there.
Plugged myself there, and yourself, you.
Thank you very much.
And yeah, I'm going to be talking about the Conservative Party today.
So today is a conservatism special. I wrote down a little thing here. So I went, conservative, a modern history of conservatism, I think is what would be a good way to do it. Changes in ideology, style, and success.
How very swish.
Thank you very much. A lot of work goes into this. So what this is going to be is basically from 1997 onwards, basically I would say more of an in-depth history of conservatism in its modern iterations and how it's changed and how successful it's been throughout. So the first question is simply, Billy, it's post-1997. John Major has just left. This took me a lot of Googling. I did not know any of this. John Major is now gone. Where are we? What's happening?
So 1997, we have a general election, and it is a phenomenal general election. If you're a Labour Party supporter, that is. And for the Conservatives, it's their worst defeat since 1906. Mm-hmm. I mean, they only have 165 seats in Parliament. They have to scramble to find a shadow cabinet. That's just how few seats they have. And it comes at the end of an 18-year Conservative long reign. And the Conservative Party's tired. It is absolutely knackered. It's been beset by Thatcherism, John Major, and the infighting and the sleaze that's produced by that. And it is absolutely knackered, and it is facing an onslaught of the new Labour juggernaut, and it's in a pretty dark place, pretty bad place.
So you could say that the Conservative Party at this point is pretty much in one of the darkest points in their history, really at the lowest. So what were the beginnings of getting out of this point? You know, who was the first person to take over? How long did it take to sort of begin to pull themselves out of this, I guess, rut?
Well, I mean, it's a 13-year claw back to power, but John Major leaves. John Major has left the scene, left the building, left the party, and in his place we have William Hague, who beats Clark and Howard. So that's Ken Clark, the Chancellor, and Michael Howard, the Home Secretary. And he's this young upstart, gravelly voice from Yorkshire. But he doesn't do a very good job, I'm afraid, at bringing the Conservative Party back into power. But because it's such a tricky job. You're facing a Labour Party that's been more energised than it has been for 30, 40 years, and it's at the zenith of its power. The chances of William Hague bringing it back were next to none. But he was a fantastic orator. Nobody could critique his skills at question time. Tony Blair was roundly every week pretty much beaten by William Hague, but that doesn't cut through to the country. That does not cut through to the country at all. What people think of William Hague when they think of William Hague, they think of someone that was aged 14 speaking at the Conservative Party conference, someone that read Hansard from the age of 10, someone that professed to drink 14 pints a day at a university. And so people think this man's a bit of a wally. And he, when he wins, he goes to a theme park and he wears these hats and he goes on log flumes and the hats, these caps, they say Hague on them. And it's just a flop. The PR way of doing things is firmly in the Labour camp at this time. And the Conservative Party is, after this defeat, it was in shock. And it's just one battle, not only with the Labour Party, but between these ideological purists. It's staunchly on the right wing, where the Labour Party occupies the centre ground here. The Conservatives run amok. And William Hague at the 2001 Conservative Party conference gives this most atrocious speech, and he warns that Britain's becoming a foreign land, and it's a bad time for the Conservative Party.
So would you say that Hague's, I guess, premier would be better described as less about his failings in terms of, I guess, as a leader or in terms of policy, but more of an inability to adapt to what is the new, I guess, norm for politics?
Absolutely.
Which is the sort of the what Blair introduced in terms of, hyper media focus and basically putting all the effort onto PR when they were still quite old school.
Absolutely. One of the major issues with the Conservative Party in this time period is just how they are fighting 10 years behind what the Labour Party are fighting. And they're reactionary. They're proposing nothing. The Labour Party, they've been in the wilderness for such a long time. They're back with ideas and they're implementing them. They're not just keeping the economy ticking over. They're not just keeping the country ticking over. They are implementing some serious wholesale reforms. And the only thing that the Conservative Party can do is say, well, we're against that, and we're against this, and we're against that. And so they end up opposing everything, but proposing nothing. And so people think this is just some sort of windbag. And so I would describe William Hague's leadership of the party as just keeping it on life support, letting it not drop any further, but not really increasing the chances of winning.
Yeah, so you could say that perhaps his role, it would be quite ridiculous to expect like an instant turnaround by a Conservative government when things change so drastically. So perhaps his role was more to just be basically just a caretaker for a little bit. Don't do anything ridiculous. Stop the massive shift to one side, and wait until these sort of ideas, like you said, that had been brewing in the Labour camp for years, start to come through for, I guess, more of a grassroots movement.
Absolutely.
And allow the Conservative Party to actually offer real, I guess, solutions or ideas rather than just saying, we'll do things like we did back then, or we'll just maintain what we did.
Absolutely. I think it's very hard for the Conservative Party to attack New Labour, because at the end of the day, New Labour is a triage. It's a third way. So it nicks the best bits of conservatism. And so you see Gordon Brown, for the first 2 years, he maintains the Conservative spending plans. And so it's very, very tricky for the Conservatives to find a soft sort of underbelly of New Labour. And when it does present itself in 2003 in the form of the Iraq War, the Conservatives are all on board with it anyway. So they shoot themselves in the foot. And going back to this sort of life support that William Hague's put it on, you get round to the 2001 general election, 1 seat. They have a net increase of 1 seat for the Conservatives. And so it's just keeping the party ticking on.
So Hague's kind of done his job in terms of just keeping the party alive, in a sense, keeping them relevant in some form. What comes next? So what spelled the downfall, or what was the resurgent move to move on from Hague?
Well, I think internally he'd set himself a little target like Neil Kinnock did in 1989 of increasing his seats by about 40 to 50, and by only increasing it by 1, that's quite a lot short. And so following the 2001 general election, William Hague resigns. And then there is a leadership contest, of which Michael Portillo, who had been out of Parliament, he was one of the famous scalps in the 1997 general election, which nobody really expected him to lose his seat. But given this tsunami for New Labour, Michael Portillo was also swept up in that. But he returned, and so he then ran for the leadership. Everyone thought Michael Portillo is the man of the moment. Michael Portillo was not the man of the moment. A very quiet, small little man named Ian Duncan Smith ran away with the leadership against Ken Clarke again. Ken Clarke's a bit of a recurring theme within this history.
He's trying his best. The poor Ken Clarke.
But Ian Duncan Smith was worse. Absolutely atrocious compared to William Hague. And when you're up against Tony Blair, the chances of him doing well are just next to nothing. And so he's just humiliated. He's embarrassed by the Labour Party. So when he goes into the chamber for PMQs, and when he goes up to speak, all the Labour MPs, they'll go shh, because he's seen as this quiet man. And then he gives this statement and he says, "Do not underestimate the determination of a quiet man." And he goes on to say, and this little line will roar, and it's just embarrassing.
Especially when you're coming against Tony Blair, who is basically like the de facto politician.
Absolutely.
Mr. Suave, smooth boy.
Absolutely. And he's got the support of Thatcher, which is not really a blessing in disguise, because people hark back and they think this is just the old Conservative Party.
Like
not changing.
Okay. An attempt to just maintain what hasn't been working, I guess.
And then he's pro the Iraq War. So what can he propose that is different to Tony Blair that's actually popular amongst the country? Nothing. Staunchly right wing, all about crime and punishment. And it's pretty bad time.
You could say that at the time when I guess weather vane politics was becoming more of a thing, Ian Duncan Smith in particular would be one who was much more of, this is the Conservative Party, these are our beliefs, we're going to stick by that, I'm here to represent that, rather than thinking, okay, I have to do something different than what the person across me is doing.
Yeah. That being said, there are signs of some new life in the Conservative Party. So at the 2001 general election, even though there's a net increase of one, of all the chopping and changing, you've got a new intake of MPs. You've got Boris Johnson, George Osborne, you've got David Cameron. So you've got these future leaders trickling in to the party. But it's not enough. And Ian Duncan Smith was pro the Iraq War. And so there's nothing really to take against New Labour, so much so that he did not last very long. He lasted a year as a leader before the only time since Neville Chamberlain that a Conservative Party leader has not gone into a general election.
Wow.
He was kicked out by a no confidence vote.
So I was going to say, because when I was doing my research for this, I literally don't have notes about Ian Duncan Smith. I had I'm not liking the name. I had Haig.
Yeah.
And then I had straight to Cameron or whatever. And I totally missed out Ian Duncan Smith.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh no.
He's a bit of an oversight, is Ian Duncan Smith. Though he does make a comeback, as does William Hague in the Cameron government. William Hague makes a remarkable comeback. I mean, I'm sure we'll come on to that. And so does Ian Duncan Smith. The universal credit idea, which he later has work and pension secretary under the Cameron government, which I'm sure we'll come to. He has, a second lease of life.
But perhaps leader wasn't
wasn't the main, I think not.
The main area. Okay.
And so then you have Michael Howard coming onto the scene. Michael Howard he was the Home Secretary during the 90s, and he is elected then unopposed in 2004 after Ian Duncan Smith's exit. And again, it's turning the party back in the right direction, but it's not enough. It is not enough for a party going up against the Labour Party. Weakened though it is, Michael Howard, there was a series of mistakes in the campaign and beforehand that meant that he was not going to win. It's a shame. I think if Ken Clarke were leader, the only time that he didn't go for it, he might have got it. Because of his opposition to the Iraq War,
of course.
Ken Clarke could have been the perfect candidate. In 2003, I think he would have been the perfect.
I mean, it's pretty clear, I think, that Blair was pretty lucky that he was a Labour Party guy doing these sort of things, because it meant that his party was with him, and the traditionally more anti-war, anti-intervention party is the one doing it, and then Conservatives who are more generally in favour of that sort of thing were like, yeah, okay, we like this. Yeah. So it meant that he could get away with he basically escaped a lot of criticism. And perhaps if Ken Clarke, who was would have been the one to actually be able to champion this criticism, things could have been very different. Yeah.
And people say Ken Clarke is the best Prime Minister we never had, and I agree. But sadly, no, he did not win, and Michael Howard won. And the election campaign of 2005, which presented the Conservatives with a chance, not much of a chance, but there was a chance.
There was one, yeah.
To win, they bungled it. The campaign was tone deaf, so they had the campaign was all about, are you thinking what we're thinking? Was their slogan, which is just
are you thinking what we're thinking?
Blatant dog whistle politics with slogans such as, it's not racist to impose limits on immigration, and this whole, are you thinking what we're thinking, sort of sowing seeds of worry amongst people. Didn't, for obvious reasons, did not work. And so the Conservative Party had a chance and they squandered it, I'm afraid to say. That being said, they did increase their seats by 33, up to 198, which is still atrocious.
True.
The Labour Party is still on 355 seats.
But it's something at least. It's something. Once again, it's enough to, I guess, because if it was the same sort of pattern of small increases, there would have been real talks of, okay, is this party dead in the water?
Yeah.
But it is enough to say, okay, they can grow if they don't do all these dumb things that they already did.
I think there was never really a question of the Conservative Party dying after 2001, purely because usually we always talk, oh God, is this the end of Labour? Oh, this is going to be the end of Labour. But this is the first time for quite some time that the Conservative Party has been out of power, and they're seen as the natural party of government. After all, they are the most successful party in political history anywhere in the world, and that is precisely because they're chameleon-like qualities.
What on earth was that?
Whoa!
Oh, I accidentally pressed a sound.
Oh God!
Sorry about that. The screen turned off. I tried to click it, and I clicked a noise.
Oh God!
Sorry, keep going.
I don't want to know what that was.
It was just a man saying "excellent."
Well, thank you for your support, Mr. Man.
He loves it.
I am. What is interesting is the Liberal Democrats. So they found a purpose. They went up and up and up in their seats, not by much, but come 2005, they are the largest third party in quite some time. And that is because of their opposition to the Iraq War, which leads one to think, if the Conservative Party had been against the Iraq War, what better place they could have been in. But alas, not. And so Michael Howard resigns.
Okay, well then that seems like the perfect end to this first segment here. We've gone over the first brief bit, all the people, I guess a lot of names people aren't that familiar now. But next up is David Cameron, I believe, or am I totally wrong? Next
I should hope people know who David Cameron is, or I will be worried.
So. There will be a problem. Well, that's why they're listening. They are here to learn about David Cameron. We're going to our first song, which is, I'm very happy about this, Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up.
Oh, goodness.
Please enjoy. Right, hello and welcome back to segment 2. So, we covered the first sort of the introductory years, post-1997, and now we're on to the more modern, exciting stuff. Ooh. So, I've already forgotten the man's name. Howard?
Michael Howard.
Michael Howard. He's gone, he's out, we're done with him, we've moved on.
He's gone. Although, what is interesting about Michael Howard's departure from office, or not from office, from leadership of the Conservative Party, compared with previous incumbents, is that he waits 6 months to leave.
Okay.
And in that time, he has a radical reshuffle of his cabinet, his shadow cabinet, that is, and brings in George Osborne and David Cameron. So David Cameron is now the shadow Secretary of State for Education, and George Osborne is the shadow Chancellor at age 33.
Wow.
And that's really interesting, because that shows that Michael Howard realises the Conservative Party needs to change. And if he is to defeat the most popular Conservative Party politician of the time, which is David Davis, which some people may know now as the ex-Brexit secretary under Theresa May, David Davis is the one to beat in 2005. And by giving 6 months of a period of reflection upon the Conservative Party, it allows David Cameron and George Osborne a chance to establish themselves as the modernisers of the Conservative Party. And so come the 2005 leadership election, Cameron still goes in as not the favourite, and David Davis goes in as a favourite. David Davis comes here to the University of Warwick because he set up Raw during his time. He launched, I don't know whether he launched his campaign or did a speech here, but he visited during the 2005 leadership election.
Wow.
But David Cameron wins because he presents himself as a moderniser.
Okay.
And he changes the way in which the Conservative Party ought to think in his beliefs, this is, and provides quite a refreshing break with the past. And he wins, and he becomes one of the youngest Conservative leaders ever. Not the youngest, but nobody can beat Pitt the Younger at the age of 25 becoming Prime Minister, unless you really are in a hurry. And Osborne becomes one of the youngest Shadow Chancellors. And David Cameron offers a different vision for the Conservative Party. So one of his first acts is to visit Northern Europe, or is it Greenland or Iceland or somewhere like that, and to talk about climate change. And he visits huskies and whatnot, and in the snow-capped regions. And it's a refreshing difference. The Conservative Party, up until then, would never have really talked about climate change with any real gusto or zeal or serious policy weight behind it. But there is David Cameron doing that. And that offers a glimpse of what's to come. So over the next 5 years, David Cameron sets out his mission to detoxify the Conservative Party. And he is pretty much successful in that endeavour. They have and maintain quite not a considerable, but a polling lead over Tony Blair. Because Tony Blair is, up until now, been up against these old, you got Michael Howard, who's old, he's in his 60s. Ian Duncan Smith, this
old-timey,
quiet little man.
blast from the past leaders.
William Hague, a bit of a wally, even though he was young. And so he's up against someone that could be a competitor for the PR slick. That's what Cameron offers. And so by the time that Blair leaves office and Brown enters office, there's a bit of a fluctuation in the polls, but then they reset themselves and the Conservatives hold a considerable lead. And then you have these dual winds of change, of fortune, that really hammer, well, one of them hammers the Labour Party, and that is the financial crash of 2008. Because up until that point, the Conservative Party has been trying to find the weak, the soft underbelly of which to jab the Labour Party with. And there it is. It presents itself. The worst crash
Yeah.
for like 50, 60 years. I mean, hello, you'd be a fool not to take it. And they do, because up until then, the Labour Party has been perfectly good at keeping the economy ticking along. And so there they have it. And there is an argument to say that the Labour Party did not cause the financial crash. It was the subprime mortgage crisis in America, that domino effect. But if it sticks, if the boot fits, and boy, did the Conservatives make sure it stuck. And so the Labour Party, they're now they're losing the economic argument. And that offers a really radical change for the Conservative parties. They're no longer on the back foot. They're no longer defensive. They are now proactive. They are now proposing stuff, and they have got a plan. And then you have the expenses scandal, which really rocks not just the Labour Party, but the Conservative parties, Liberal Democrats. Nobody is left unscathed, because you have MPs claiming for all sorts of stuff they shouldn't be claiming. They sort of changed the designations of their first house and their house that they use in London to sort of get back tax from it. They claim tax for all sorts of ridiculous things. There's a Conservative MP that claims thousands of pounds in tax for his duck pond house, and that becomes like the symbol
there was a Labour MP's husband who somehow managed to claim for loads of pornography.
Yeah,
that was a big one.
And the public sit back and they think this is a disgrace. And it really tars not so much the Conservative Party, even though there are Conservative Party MPs that are tainted by it, but it tars the current political status of the time. And the Conservative Party is able to use that. David Cameron's really effective, and he says, right, if you've done this, you pay your money back, or you leave the party.
Yeah.
And so Michael Gove was one of these, and he paid the money back, and he went to a constituency meeting, and he just grovelled for a few hours, and people accepted it. But you have some MPs, on the other hand, there's like Theresa May, a personal favourite of mine, who actually came out of that unscathed and enhanced for underclaiming,
nice.
which is quite nice. And so these sort of dual wins change the political dynamic of the time. And so going into 2010 general election, it's not all to play for. The Conservative Party are projected to win, and they do. They don't win, but for the Conservative Party, after 13 years in wilderness, they get back in. So they get 306 seats. That's over a 120 seat increase. When we're talking beforehand about, William Hay got one more.
One seat, 30 seats.
This is 120 seats. Labour Party, they collapsed by just shy of 100 seats. And so the Conservative Party face themselves with a choice, because this is the first time since the 70s that we are faced with a hung parliament. No party has an outright majority. And even though now we think, it was a given that the Liberal Democrats would go into coalition with the Conservatives, that was not a given. And so for 2 weeks, there's some serious haggling and bargaining going on, because Gordon Brown will be dragged out of number 10, kicking and screaming before he gives it up. And so he really tries to go for a coalition with the Liberal Democrats, offering electoral reform, which is one of the big prize issues that the Liberal Democrats want. But they realise that the Labour Party is tired and it is over. And do you want to ally yourself with a tired party? No. And so they go in with the Conservatives.
So going back to the two main issues, the two, I guess, defeats that you described, could you say that, so you said that, for example, the expenses scandal affected Labour more than Conservatives. So would you say that perhaps what this issue was, a representation of, is more that it was more a tarring of less than either party, but of establishment or like old figureheads? And what David Cameron offered was putting the Conservatives in a slightly odd position for them historically, in being almost the anti-establishment. Cameron's the one to say, all right, we're getting rid of all these old heads who have been taking money from you lot forever, and if they don't, they're leaving the party. So perhaps it was this almost, I guess, less explicit than it would be now of other leaders, but an anti-establishment rhetoric, which put Cameron on this sort of playing field.
I think David Cameron was very adept at using the situation to his advantage. That there were Conservative MPs that really came to symbolise all this lack of trust and through the expenses scandal. However, there was an opportunity there to take it, and David Cameron did. But more importantly, what it represented was, and has ramifications in 2016 in the referendum, a complete lack of trust in MPs. MPs thinking they take the public for a ride, and the public really did not take too kindly to that. And it's showing signs of a disappointment with the establishment in politics, that think that MPs are out in it for themselves and not for the public. And this manifests itself. Despite David Cameron's best efforts at leading the country from 2010 onwards, this still manifests itself, and this lack of trust leads in some ways to Brexit.
Yeah, so what would you say would be the number one change that Cameron made from previous administrations? Was it purely his PR and his sort of ability to, I guess, modernise in a sense and realise what direction they need to move into? Or was it were there very large policy changes as well, or was it much more just in general the PR side, sort of matching Labour in terms of being a media-focused party?
Well, I think that matching Labour and being a media-focused party was definitely very, very important. And it brought the Conservative Party into the 21st century. That being said, they were also aided by some serious policies and a clear manifesto that was different to Labour's for the first time. Austerity, which David Cameron the public were really on board with in 2010. Out of a need, I think there was a knowledge that there was a need to do this. Because David Cameron, one of his successful things was every £4 we spent, we borrowed one of them. And that was a real big thing that he put forward in the 2010 campaign, focusing on the economy and how we need to tighten the belt and we need to go back to sort of fiscal responsibility. And I think going into government in the coalition with the Liberal Democrats, that's what they offered.
Okay, so and then obviously, so we had the coalition. It was a bit of an odd time, I guess, but
very odd time. This is the first formal coalition for ages.
So generally, what I read around that time was it was less turbulent than people were expecting. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. So people thought, oh god, coalition, that Liberal Democrats, they'll be gone in a few years as soon as the Conservative Party sees a pickup in their fortunes. That'll be a snap general election. But what the Liberal Democrats do, which has extreme ramifications for the next 10 years, is they say, you can go into coalition with us if you sign this bill. And it is the Fixed Term Parliament Act of 2011, which basically says prime ministers are no longer allowed to just dissolve parliament like that on the Queen, obviously, on the advice of the prime minister. They have to do their term for 5 years. And if you want to call it a general election, it needs 2/3 support from the House or a motion of no confidence. And people sit up and think, oh, okay. Yeah. And it really works. Yeah. So 2010, 2015 was great. The Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, they were great little bedfellows. And almost weirdly, the Conservatives went into the 2015 election expecting to be back into coalition. And so they wrote into the manifesto of 2015 all these sort of dog whistle tactics for their voters, such as, let's have a referendum on the EU, which David Cameron expected to write out as soon as he went into coalition with the Liberal Democrats, and we all know how that ended for him.
So, do you think that Cameron established a bedrock for future Conservative, administrations? Like, so did his policy or anything like that really last, or was it simply the change in style and attitude, which is one that might maintain beyond him and his tenure?
Do I think he had a long-lasting impact? I suppose.
Whether in policy or in, style and attitude towards politics in the party.
Yeah, I suppose in a sense he did. The fiscal responsibility lasted, and the PR lasted. But what I do think has changed is that the Conservative Party of 2010, up until David Cameron resigning, was a metropolitan Liberal party. George Osborne would have been perfectly at home in the Liberal Democrats. And I think people grew tired of the metropolitan elite of which David Cameron was a symbol of. A symbol of a posh boy that wanted to be Prime Minister purely for wanting to be Prime Minister.
Felt like he was born into it.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that changed. The character of the Conservative Party changed from 2001 to onwards. I mean, it is amazing how much David Cameron detoxified the Labour Party. So in 2001, at the leadership election for the Conservative Party, I said earlier that Michael Portillo was the hot favourite. Do you know why he went out of favour?
Why?
Because there were allegations in newspapers that he had certain homosexual experiences at university. And in the eyes of the Conservative Party, that was ruinous. And he was lambasted and kicked out. Not kicked out, but he was
shunned.
out of favour. To a party that, under David Cameron, legalised gay marriage. That is a phenomenal change in the space of 10 years.
So,
And so David Cameron made an excellent effort at detoxifying the Conservative Party, and it should not be understated in any way whatsoever. But it, unfortunately, owing to Brexit, did not last.
Sure. So you could say that Cameron, what he did was he changed the Conservative Party and I guess its attitude and I guess social liberalism in a sense.
Absolutely.
However, his specific policies and areas and I guess style in general has sort of died out a bit.
I would say so.
Sure, okay. So, unfortunately now we have to go to our next song, but then we will be moving on to the last two leaders. We have May and Boris.
And a slight issue of Brexit.
And the very tiny issue, the one that we never pay attention to. This is our next song by Hugh Grant, Pop Goes My Heart. Enjoy. And we're back for the final segment. We don't have an insane amount of time, so we're going to dive straight in here. How much did Brexit change the Conservative Party?
God, how long have you got?
In less than 15 minutes.
Yeah. Brexit was a long time coming. And the inability of David Cameron to contain the right-wing forces within his own party and his inability to control the rise of UKIP meant that it was a long time coming. And Brexit, which sort of came to symbolise, along with Donald Trump, populism across the globe, really was a game changer, not only for the Conservative Party, but for the Labour Party, for the Liberal Democrats, for Parliament as an institution, and for the country. It caused the country to look in on itself and say, who are we? And what do we want? What do we see our position in the world? And what do we see our relationship with other countries in the world? And it was hugely important event. And this is Euroscepticism and the Conservative Party go hand in hand. So they're always fighting over Europe. John Major was basically brought down over Europe. The infighting over the Maastricht Treaty and what he called members of his own cabinet bastards over their rebellious nature during the Maastricht Treaty years. And so it brought down John Major, it brought down David Cameron, and it brought down Theresa May. And if Boris doesn't get a grip on things, which I don't know if he does or not, it'll bring down him too. Conservative Party's got no fear in doing that. And so Brexit caused the Conservative Party to look in on itself and say, who are we? Not only what is the country, but what are we for? And Brexit was, very important.
So could you say that Brexit even changed the type of politicians that people consider to be the mainstream? Because you could say that, in a Brexit world where discourse was, I guess, less like civil in general, and it was much more direct in terms of these sort of things. Someone like David Cameron, who tries to be, the statesman, the like polite, whatever, kind of fell out of favor in favor of more people who are more loud and direct and I guess a bit more, believable as human beings in a sense.
Yeah, so there's a big rise, isn't there, during the populist years.
And even someone like Boris, who people wouldn't really describe often as a populist, I'd say, but he is believable as a person because he is weird, I think, generally.
Yeah, so there's a big rise of these men of the people. I'm one of you, I'm on your side.
Yeah.
And David Cameron, one of the big mistakes was he chose a side. And he put himself up for that. At the time, he was the most popular politician in Britain, but he was unleashing some vast forces of which he knew he had no control over. And so he took a side. What he could have done is, so in 1975, Harold Wilson, or at some point in the 1970s, we had the first referendum on whether or not we should stay in the what was then not the EU, the common market.
Sure.
And Harold Wilson said, I think we should remain, but I'm not going to play a role in this campaign. And he rose above it. And David Cameron was not able to rise above it because David Cameron inserted himself so forcefully into the situation. David Cameron went to the EU to try and get a deal and say, look, if we remain, we can have this deal, or if we leave, I don't know. And the deal that he came back with was one of the worst deals I think there's ever been. There was no real, oh my God, this is going to fundamentally change the way that we work with Europe. It was just like, oh, well, we'll change pensions, we'll tweak those a little bit, and we'll tweak something about immigration and claiming of benefits a little bit. And people took one look at David Cameron, people in left behind towns, which is a rising feature in British politics, the sort of it's a tale of two countries almost. You've got liberal metropolitan cities, like London, like Liverpool, well, not Liverpool, yeah, cities.
Sure, yeah, just the main major cities.
Leeds, Manchester, people that dwell in cities compared with people that dwell in towns and villages. And the stark difference between those two just only grew, and it came to signify what Brexit became. And so Brexit happens. We leave the European Union. It's a great shock. Who's going to succeed? David Cameron is our question. And it's Theresa May. She purposefully was very quiet in the referendum. She was
stay out of it.
a Remainer. She only made one public appearance in which she gave an extremely balanced view of the European Union. And she was seen as the best pair of hands because Michael Gove and Boris Johnson, the two leading lights of the Brexit campaign, just tore chunks off each other. So Boris went for it.
Each other down.
And
Theresa May was the last one standing.
Boris went for it. Michael Gove thought this is good, and then Michael Gove thought this is actually bad. So so Gove stabbed him in the back and stood himself. Then Boris pulled out. Then Gove didn't get enough votes, and then Theresa May teetered and sort of walked over the bodies into.
So I just have about one question about Theresa May during her prime ministerial, I guess, tenure. Would you describe her as being reactive or proactive? So do you think that she actually had any room to do things that she would want to do, or was she purely just constantly trying to put out fires around Brexit? Did Brexit really derail any sort of ideology or plan that she could potentially enforce?
I think Brexit put a pause on government and on Parliament for about 3 years because Brexit is the biggest constitutional change that this country has faced since the Second World War. Do I think that Theresa May had any policy ideas? Yes, she did. Were at a different time, she could have implemented them. But she faced this task. She had some ideas of her own. She was, pro-grammar schools. It was a shift away from the David Cameron years to a more maternal, Shires-based conservatism. But she herself was faced with these two conflicts. How do I reconcile a party that is full of Thatcherites and One Nation people?
And that weird group of Brexiteers who are angry at everyone.
And she said, what am I? She is, she came to prominence in the opposition years, of Haig and of IDS and of Howard. She was the party chairman. And so she's got these Thatcherite tendencies, but she's also got these One Nation tendencies of the David Cameron years. And so she's trying to reconcile them. She's trying to fudge it all together, which Boris Johnson is just avoiding doing at the moment. And she's trying to fudge the two together, and it just doesn't. She cannot. There is no space to do so. And so she is eventually brought down by her own party.
Left just constantly reacting and eventually couldn't carry the Conservatives into the next.
I mean, I feel desperately sorry for her. She was given a rum deal of the thing. But no, she was brought down by her party because she was seen as being inefficient enough and too stilted.
So then we move on to everyone's favourite Boris Johnson, the I guess you'd say the backbench side, fallen into several different Conservative leaders, finally takes power. So what would you say? What has he changed from, I guess, May or Cameron? And do you think that he will establish a new norm in the Conservative Party?
Okay, so Boris Johnson has found something incredibly successful, and he's found a different way of doing politics for the Conservative Party. He said, okay, so we're going to be economically slightly left-wing, but culturally slightly conservative, and oh my God, this was a fantastic mix to hoover up these red wall seats that are usually Labour, but feel they have been
left behind,
abandoned by the Labour Party. The Labour Party have been indifferent to towns because these voters have a real sense of identity in their place, and they want their towns to have dignity and respect. They don't want to be faceless cities. They don't want to move around the country. They want to live and die in the same towns. And that might be slightly strong, but there's a strong sense of identity. And the Conservative Party, I think, picked up on that and said, yeah, okay, we're going to spend more. We're going to level up, in the words of Boris Johnson, our society. And we're going to give more money to the north. We're going to spend on infrastructure in the north, and we're going to look away from cities.
So could you say that one of Boris's main success was managing to position himself as not an establishment person, someone who'd been in government for a while? He managed to essentially make it look like, or at least, successfully sell to the people that Labour are the ones leaving you behind, even though we've been in government for a while. Perhaps that sort of anti-establishment rhetoric is something that he was successful in, but is that something which can last, considering that he is now the Prime Minister?
Yeah, well, I think Brexit had a nasty little habit of turning everything topsy-turvy, because one of the most phenomenal things of the 2019 election campaign was that Boris Johnson was acting like he'd not been in government, like the Conservatives hadn't been in government for 9 years. He was saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do that. And people thought, yes, almost as if it was a different Conservative Party entirely. And Labour were just scratching around arguing over anti-Semitism. I'm sure they had no hope whatsoever.
Really did slow down the party. So do you think that Boris will have a legacy in a sense, or will he be more
I'm sure he'll have a legacy of some sort.
One that will be long-lasting in terms of party changes, or do you think he will have his time, it'll be like a fun few years, but then eventually he will just fade out and then the Conservative Party will go back to either old norms or something new? Or do you see his style and his sort of personality being something which the Conservative Party will aim to repeat?
Unfortunately, I'm not a clairvoyant. However...
you can try to be one.
I do think that he has picked up on something very interesting, and I think that if he's able to deliver, then that could become the new coalition for the Conservative Party. I'm not sure where Labour will go, dependent upon their leader, which will probably be Keir Starmer, which will be interesting. But I think he has potentially found the roots of a really strong coalition for a future Conservative Party fit for the 21st century.
So you could say that what Boris has been successful in is finding the potential for a new type of conservatism, in a sense, by wedding, sort of, as you said, like more slightly left-wing economic policies and slightly more culturally conservative social policies.
I mean, not like radically conservative socially, but because what we fail to forget is that Boris Johnson was one of the first members in the Conservative Party to call for gay marriage and the abolition of and the repeal of Section 24.
One of the few to not vote against it in its first iteration as well.
And this is the man that was a London mayor, a mayor of the most metropolitan liberal city. He, I think, embodies the Conservative Party in its chameleon-like qualities. So it'd be very interesting to see where he does go.
They're interesting. You could say that perhaps his legacy will be the ability to change under very different circumstances.
Absolutely.
Right then. Thank you so much for coming on, Billy.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
This has been a fantastic time. Everyone go follow Billy on Twitter, Billy_Lucas15. Check out Perspectives Magazine. Just got nominated for an award by the student journalism people. Best specific
specialist publication.
That's it. So
which is quite exciting.
There are several good articles. One about American foreign policy. One about Trump.
Who wrote that?
One about what else have I done? I can't just flick through. You'll see Hugh smiling and go, "Oh, that's pretty good, isn't it?" And then put it down. No, but the Perspectives is a great magazine. Give it a good read. Thank you so much for coming on, Billy. This has been amazing.
Thank you so much for having me on here.
I'm sure I'll have you on at some point again. This is our last song. This is by Millie Turner, and it's The Jungle. Thank you very much. We're on iTunes and Spotify, by the way.
Hey!
Enjoy!